Hello, and welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm Matt's older brother. I'm a writer, and I'll be asking him the questions, and he'll be answering them because he is Matt Farrell. Matt, say hello.
Hello.
Before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder about different ways you can support the podcast. We, of course, appreciate all our subscribers, all our commenters, all our likers, and
Likers?
everybody who, a liker,
A liker. Okay.
a liker. Somebody who goes around liking. And if you want to directly support the podcast, you can do that at stilltbd.fm. There's a link there. And you can throw some quarters into the jar. We appreciate any kind of support you're able to give. On to some comments from our last episode. Quick couple of shout outs from Zachariah Stovall, who suggested that, Matt, maybe you could 3D print a garage or a shed to give some first-person experience on the 3D printing of
That would be cool to build,
structures.
do like a little studio in the backyard, have it 3D printed.
It would be
cool.
The ability to do that now, to actually come out with like some sort of like little beehive looking shed in your backyard would actually be pretty neat.
Yeah, it would.
Zachariah also gave us a shout out saying he couldn't wait till we hit 500,000 subscribers.
It's going to be a while.
You're going to be waiting a while, Zachariah.
I appreciate
We, of course, would welcome all subscribers, but word of mouth being what it is.
Yeah. It's going to be a while.
Yeah. We also heard again from Arnav Biswas, who kindly shared his thoughts about panels versus tiles. And this has been a discussion that's been picked up a couple of times on the channel because of different videos that Matthew's done in investigating the benefits of one over the other. And Arnab shared some thoughts along with the perspective of, as an electronic engineer, he has a lot of DIY expertise in this area. So his suggestion was he would be able to do a lot of this work himself around selecting panels. And he also lives in India. And he pointed out that the panels there are very cheap and that labor costs are very cheap. So for him, the benefits of the panels versus tiling a roof with solar tiles would be the option he'd go with. He also pointed out and agreed with something that we'd mentioned in previous episodes, that sometimes subsidies play a role in all of this. He's not aware of any subsidies that he would be able to benefit from, but given the overall cost, out-of-pocket cost, being less in India, he would be leaning toward panels over tiles.
Yeah. India's got great prices. Fantastic.
And also the environment being what it is there, the amount of daylight and the location, depending on where you are in India, it's a very, very large country. So depending on where you are, it's gonna vary as well. But given those the access to that level of daylight around that part of the world would be a great benefit as well.
Yep.
So for today's episode, we're going to be discussing Matt's most recent episode, which is the future of solid state wind energy. No more blades. This episode dropped on May 18th, 2021. And up to this point has racked up 1.2 million views. That's a lot of people looking in your windows.
I don't know how this is happening, but okay.
What are when you curious from the perspective of somebody on the outside of a YouTube channel looking in, do you get to see any special analytic information that gives you a clue as to what has brought someone to a view? Do you see keywords that may have been used to find you? Is this something that is the right combination of like solid state energy production? Is that something people are going and looking for? Or is it wind energy? Or is it the fact that you have the word blades in there and people just like blades?
It's a combination of everything. Yes, we do get insights into this. Like when you look at YouTube analytics, we can see what the common search terms that people are looking for that are sending people to videos. But when a video hits like this is the YouTube algorithm doing its thing. It's just like people who have watched videos on, who knows, solid state batteries and wind energy and solar panel videos might like this. And if they put it in front of a person and they click that thumbnail and they watch it for a long time, they watch most of the video, the algorithm's going to go, okay, let's roll it out to more people and more people. And so this one, I think, is just a combination of, I talk about solid state and then wind energy combined with an interesting looking thumbnail and title. It's like, I just think it was like the perfect storm for this video, which is just, I don't know. I was traveling this week and I was visiting my parents when the video launched, and I didn't look at my analytics immediately like I usually do. So it was probably had been out for maybe 6 or 7 hours by the time I looked, and it, at that point, was hundreds of thousands of views. And I was just like did a double take and hit refresh. Like, that can't be right. It's usually not that high. It just took me off guard. But I think it's the subject. I think it's an interesting topic, and it's just, I think it's the right topic, the right time, and it just kind of caught on.
I will say, as somebody who's a regular viewer, obviously, of your channel, the image for this one was particularly eye-catching.
Interesting. Yeah.
It really did look like it was a window into a sci-fi future that was very captivating and like triggered a strong response in me. I was like, oh, I can't wait to watch that. So it was a very, very effective image to use. And as you point out in the video, your initial response to this is, how on earth could this possibly work?
Yeah.
And in some cases, the descriptor of no more blades is a little bit of a misnomer. Because certain things like the pods that you described
still has
at the end of
blades
the video,
inside.
there are blades inside. So in some cases, it's not that there's no more blades, but no more visible blades, or no more,
correct,
moving parts that you could actually touch. So
these are all
there's
safe.
that there's a safety to it. Yeah. Some of the, one of them being called Sweat. That's unfortunate. Sweat.
Yeah.
One of the things that the device that is being used for that building in Rotterdam, is the engineer who developed that, is he located there, or was he? It was Epstein, right?
Yeah, Epstein. Yes.
Yeah.
He's not
in
located
the U.S.
I don't know. I actually don't know where he is right now, but no, he's not in that location. But they're taking that concept.
They're taking his work. They're taking it to a scale that obviously, it's interesting to me that they would take something like this that is not even being commercially produced yet anywhere, and they're applying it in the building itself. The design of the building is to incorporate it.
Yeah.
That's kind of an audacious step. And again, that building, the design of it, super cool. It just like very futuristic. It reminds me of the building in London that is shaped like I guess it's called the Pickle. Giant egg-shaped building, very avant-garde design, very, really pushing an old city in a direction to look new. And I can imagine that going back far enough, when the Eiffel Tower was built above Paris, the response from the public would be, what the heck is this thing?
Exactly.
Of course, now it's an identity. And I think that we're seeing now contemporary efforts to recreate that Eiffel Tower moment. Of designers and architects are now of the mindset of like, we know what the Eiffel Tower was like then versus now. It's become the icon. We need that icon. Yep. So a building like that is fascinating. The incorporation of this technology, which is a series of wires. I couldn't help but think one of the complaints about the giant spinning blades of normal wind turbines is you're killing birds. And you point out like the number of birds, like keep things in perspective.
It's bad.
You say number in isolation, and it's like, holy cow, that's an enormous number, and that's terrible. And wind power is evil. And then you say, but the number of house cats that kill birds, that's something that was in the news here in New York City. It was about 6 years ago. There was an article in the New York Times, which was animal experts talking about the bird populations in the city being decimated by house cats. And because the birds are killed, it affects the insect population, which leads to West Nile issues because there aren't enough birds eating the insects before the insects become carriers of West Nile. So it's part of that whole, like, the life cycle of all of these things is all interconnected. But I couldn't help but think that building with those wires.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, remember when we were little, our mom had the hard-boiled egg slicer?
Yes. Are you just picturing birds flying into it?
Flying through it and just coming out as
5 slices.
Like slices falling from the air. People walking on the street with umbrellas up because bird innards are landing.
I really don't think that's going to happen. What's going to happen is I could see rows of pigeons just like, like on, electrical lines. Like it'll just have birds just like lined up on it.
And the bottom part of the U of the building is going to be covered with like, every day there's going to be a custodian out there with a hose. Just,
I think that's going to be the biggest problem for them is how do you keep the birds off the line?
Right. And then another one that you spoke about was I didn't catch the name. I was trying to type it out while I was watching the video and I didn't get it entirely, but the vortex induced vibration resonant device, the
Vortex Bladeless is the company.
The Vortex Bladeless, right?
Yep.
Which
the comments in the video.
We've already talked about the image you used. We already talked about the image you used for the video, a very futuristic looking shot of a bladeless energy producer. And I wonder why you didn't go with an image of the world's most energetic dildo. It really...
I have one. I usually create, 4 or 5 different, thumbnails to flip through if one's not working. And one of them was just the vibrating thing. And it's like, it makes me laugh every time I look at it. I was like, it's hard to tell what that is, but it looks really dirty. Like, what is this?
One of your commenters actually left a comment saying, my girlfriend is apparently obsessed with bladeless wind turbines. She even has a prototype in her nightstand.
In my video, it's like I said, it looks really weird because I didn't want to make the comment, but whoa boy, you guys that watch the video have been saying all the things that popped into my head.
I think the funniest comment for me was actually from Rye Daddy, who wrote, you paint that wiggling column the right shade of green and it would blend right into any desert as just another cactus. And while I enjoyed that comment, I thought it would also look like the angriest cactus you've ever seen. Just imagine somebody on a nice desert hike and looking through a field of cactus. And you and I, before the pandemic, it now feels like it was about 10 years ago. I think it was 2. We went to Arizona.
Yes.
And we were there for a tour of a self-driving vehicle company that has a fleet of self-driving cars. And while we were there, I'd never been to the Southwest before. And it really was on the way from the airport. You're suddenly just in very flat terrain with cactuses everywhere. And it really just, like, I hadn't been in that environment before, and it was spectacular. It was beautiful. And I imagine somebody hiking through the desert and looking at those cactuses and then seeing a bunch of them look like they're angrily
back up.
Uh-oh. You're getting too close.
Yeah.
And I also thought of the confusion of the birds in that environment. I mean, we talked about the building with the wires and the birds flying through and turning themselves into egg salad. But there would also be the confusion of the birds trying to land on those vibrating bladeless devices. I could just imagine a couple of birds sitting on them and like, do you feel something moving?
Hey Bob, I can't grip onto this thing.
Yeah. The next design you talked about was the Vortex Turbine, and it's a very simple device that is effectively 2 or 3 scoops. That
Yeah.
The positive there, obviously, is that it can pick up the wind from any direction, and it's not as, it doesn't have as large a profile as the bladed turbine, allowing animals to more easily avoid it. And as you pointed out in the video at the beginning, even about the bladed turbine, something as simple as painting one of the can create enough of an effect that animals are able to avoid it.
Yeah.
But there was a comment that was left about some of this stuff not being necessarily as good in an environment like New York City versus a environment like Texas, where, and I think that that's kind of missing an opportunity of some of the creative thinking that goes on. There are these Vortex turbines actually in New York City. We have some of them. There's within my own neighborhood, there's a Whole Foods that has in the parking lot.
You can
they
see
have some of these Vortex turbines on top.
They're called Savonius turbines.
Right. Yeah. Right. Those turbines are actually on, it looks like the roof of the building, and some of they're effectively on large stands so that they look like they're looming over the building itself, and they create a kind of, when you first see them, they strike you as more a modern art exhibit than anything. Yeah. Because as they slowly turn, they create an interesting, from a distance, they create an interesting 2-dimensional optical illusion of looking like ribbons that are disappearing. So it creates this very interesting visual effect, and it's very striking.
Well, one of the things that I'm glad you brought up that commenter, because it's like, there isn't one technology that we need to lean into. It's like there's different technologies for different situations. So like this may work well for New York City, this one might work well for areas of Arizona and Texas, and this one might work well for offshore. It's like it's not like one of these is going to replace all the stuff we did before. It's going to be a mixture of all the stuff. Some of these are good for high winds that you need for out at sea. Others are better for lower wind that's going to be generated inside of a city. So it's use the technology that's right for the job. But the thing I was trying to bring up through all of this was, and I kind of tried to downplay the bird thing. And a lot of people have said that I shouldn't have done that, which I don't agree with, but I was trying to just give it context. The whole point of the video was, here's other technologies that will be really good for birds because there's no moving parts. Birds aren't going to be killed by them. So it's like, that was kind of the point of why I was bringing this up, of there's a lot of stuff on the roadmap and that's being researched right now that should help to alleviate a lot of these concerns people have around today's technology.
Right.
And it's not that it's going to necessarily replace it wholesale, but it's going to be a patchwork of all the stuff.
Right. It seemed very much like your argument. I could understand why some people might miss what your point was, but your argument was not, we should avoid this or go to that based on the death of birds.
Correct.
It was, the bird issue is in some cases, it's used by some people in a way that to argue against something, when taken into context, it not only is not as grand an issue as some people make it out to be, but also it's now very easily avoidable. So,
right. So that was the main point of what I was trying to bring up. There are solutions to help mitigate that issue. It is an issue people should be concerned about, and it's something that people are trying to solve. So that's kind of all I was trying to put out there.
Yeah, and I wanted to end on the comments that came in response to your question about the Power Pod. The Power Pod, immediately I'm just like, well, Star Trek. That's a Star Trek device right there. They just introduced a Star Trek device. It looked like the kind of thing that you would take, be able to quickly set up. I could imagine it has, you think about emergency response teams being able to show up and drop these things off at locations where there's been a power outage and people being able to stick one of these on a roof or a bunch of them on a roof of some building. Thinking in terms of like flooding or an earthquake, some major event which has caused a grid collapse, and these being a way to quickly and safely bring power to a certain spot for a certain amount of time based on what looks like no moving parts on the outside.
Yes.
And just a really fascinating design, the simplicity behind it of the fact that it increases the wind speed by funneling the air through a smaller exit, and the things that people are able to do with that kind of, it really goes back to the water wheel. It felt like it was taking effectively a simple idea, an idea that's been around for hundreds upon hundreds of years, and taking that to its next logical place, which is you build this little thing, you can put it into a truck and you can drop it off where it needs to be and it can work. But it could also, and you raise the question, would you mount this on your roof? Would you put this on your home? And there were commenters who, like the previously mentioned commenter, who said, well, somewhere in Texas, yes, but in New York City, no. I think that's missing an opportunity for that's a statement that it seems to be saying, like, well, you don't have enough wind in New York City.
The buildings channel so much
I can tell
air.
you put those on top of some of our taller buildings, those little turbines are going to be moving 24 hours a day.
I used to work in the financial district of Boston, and I can tell you, you take a step outside that building and it feels like you're in the middle of a wind tunnel. It's like, because the buildings funnel it down these streets. So it's like, there's a lot of opportunity for wind capture in the city.
Yeah.
A lot.
And other people were on the other side quickly jumping on and saying they would absolutely do this. There was one interesting comment, and I wanted to bring it back to this comment about these technologies being studied from a noise generation standpoint. And I'm curious about whether or not you knew what is the noise generation of any of these things, including, do you know what the noise generation of the standard large propeller wind turbine is? Does that effectively sound like a giant whooshing sound, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, there's a giant whooshing sound. There's a low vibration from the gigantic turbines. And if you live close to one, it's going to be very distracting. It's this like thrum. So that complaint of noise is a very valid one. But like when you're talking about building offshore wind turbines and stuff like that, you will never hear them. It's like they're so far away.
Right.
But for these, I didn't look specifically at what each one did for decibel levels and the kind of sound, because some of the companies weren't providing any information. Some of them were only providing information of, this one's virtually silent, or like the Vortex Turbine, the one that vibrates. They did say that there is a moderate amount of sound, but it's minimal and can be minimized, and it won't be distracting depending on where you've put it. So it's like if you build it on top of a building, you probably won't hear it. But if it's closer to the street level or something like that, you might hear a little bit of something. But it's
I couldn't help
it's
but
something
think,
to concern
like,
yourself
about. Is that
about.
thing going to sound like, I don't know if you've ever seen these videos of like the dog playing with the doorstop that's mounted on the baseboard? Yeah. Like, does that thing just sound like a constant vibrating spring?
No. No.
Or something like the Power Pod. It does have a spinning turbine disc inside.
You will hear something. Yes.
I imagine it could make some noise that might sound like it could be something that would sound like potentially a spin cycle on a washing machine. You could hear something like that possibly.
It's completely different technology, but Ben Sullins, a YouTuber, did a video on, I can't remember what the name of the company is, but they sell these solar panel systems where it's a solar panel that has this thing on the back of it that uses that energy to generate water, drinking water, just from the air. And it's like this amazing technology. Like, imagine you live in Arizona or Australia, you live in an area where water is of concern. You can provide enough drinking water for your family just by putting a couple of these things up. And he bought a couple for himself, and he lives in San Diego, and he put them on his roof, and he did a 1 year later about like how it's been. And he's like, it's amazing. It's amazing technology, but they are so noisy that
Oh,
I think his neighbors hate them because when they run, it's like when they're generating the water, it is like having a exposed compressor sound from a refrigerator just on your roof. It's awful. It sounds horrendous. So it's like, I would be concerned if you got this power pod, if it would just have this, just a constant sound. So that is something to be concerned about. I couldn't find any details about the power pod specifically, but
right.
yeah.
And there is
Noise
a
is an issue.
positive that quickly turns to a negative.
Yes.
Because as you point out with the solar panels, they only work during the day. But if at 3:00 in the morning, the wind is picking up and it sounds like your house is about to lift off, that's going to be a negative.
Yes.
So to continue that conversation, I'm interested if our listeners would be interested in, as Matthew says, would you use a power pod on your house, or would you in your backyard put up some of those vibrating, I don't even know what to call them. Would you put them up as waggling fingers to your neighbors? Tell us what you think. You can find the contact information in the podcast description. That is, of course, available on the podcast provider you're using or YouTube. It'll be right below this video. Please do subscribe. We have many ways to support the podcast. You can subscribe. You can leave a comment. You can like. You can also go to stilltbd.fm and you'll find a support the podcast link there. And you can throw some pennies in the jar. Please be sure to give us a rating, a review, and share us with your friends. All those really do help the podcast. The podcast helps the channel helps Matthew, and then Matthew puts dirty pictures into his videos. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.